Ladies and gentlemen, the first keynote is the one that instantly wakes people up, because it removes the mystery and replaces it with a law of human behavior. Avoidants keep ignoring you because ignoring you works. It regulates them, it reduces pressure, it protects them from vulnerability, and most importantly, it costs them nothing. And as long as ignoring you continues to work, it will continue. Now that statement can sound harsh, so let me be clear. This does not automatically mean they are evil. This does not automatically mean they never cared. It means their nervous system has learned a strategy for comfort when emotions rise, when closeness feels heavy. When responsibility appears, they withdraw. And withdrawal gives them relief. Their body calms, their mind quiets. The threat they feel disappears. That is why they do it. But here is the part most people miss. Your reaction completes the loop. Think of it like this. Behavior is trained by reward. The reward is not always pleasure. Sometimes the reward is relief. Relief is one of the strongest rewards the human brain can experience. If a person feels uncomfortable and then they do something that removes the discomfort, their brain learns, do that again. So an avoidant feels pressure, they withdraw, and they feel relief. That's reward number one. Then, if you chase them, send paragraphs, call repeatedly, beg for clarity, or keep the emotional door wide open, you give them reward number two, reassurance that they can withdraw without losing you. They get space and they still get access. They get relief and they still get your energy. They get the best of both worlds, distance when they want it, closeness when it benefits them. Ladies and gentlemen, that is why ignoring you becomes a habit, not because you are not valuable, but because the pattern is comfortable for them and tolerated by you. And here is the moment that creates massive curiosity in the audience. Most people think they are fighting for love when they chase. They think they are being loyal. They think if I show them I care, they'll come back. But in an avoidant dynamic, your chase often teaches the opposite lesson. It teaches I can disappear and you will still be here. I don't have to face consequences. I don't have to learn emotional responsibility. I can reset the connection whenever I want. That's not love being built. That's a system being trained. Now, keynote one is not here to shame you. It's here to give you power. Because once you realize ignoring you is being rewarded, you stop begging them to change. You stop trying to convince them with words. You stop trying to be enough. You start doing the only thing that changes behavior. You change what the behavior produces. Because if ignoring you produces comfort, it will continue. But if ignoring you produces loss of access, loss of intimacy, loss of emotional safety net, then the brain gets a new message: this strategy cost me. And when a strategy costs you, you either stop it or you lose the relationship. Now let's bring this into real life, ladies and gentlemen. You send a message, something simple. A question, a need, a request. They don't reply for hours, days, sometimes weeks. You feel panic, your mind spirals, your heart says fix it, and you send another message. Hey, are you okay? Then another, then a paragraph explaining how you feel. Then you call. Then you apologize for being emotional. Then you offer them an escape route. It's okay, I understand, just tell me you're fine. And what happened there? You taught them that your needs are negotiable. You taught them that silence doesn't have consequences. You taught them that they can withdraw and still receive your love, your reassurance, your availability. So their nervous system learns, if I ignore, the pressure goes down and the relationship stays. That's a perfect deal for avoidance. Keynote one is also the moment your audience must face a hard truth. If you keep rewarding ignoring, you become a participant in your own emotional starvation, because your nervous system begins to associate love with uncertainty. You start measuring your worth by their replies. You start living in the space between messages. You start losing your dignity, trying to keep someone near who only stays when it's easy. That's why this keynote is called The Price. Because the price isn't something you do to them. It's something you stop doing to yourself. So the new rule begins here. Not anger, not revenge, not games, structure, calm consequences, standards. And the first standard is internal. I do not chase people who ignore me. I do not beg for basic respect. I do not reward silence with more effort. I do not turn myself into an emotional performer for someone who refuses emotional responsibility. Now, ladies and gentlemen, understand this too. When you stop rewarding ignoring, the avoidant may react. They may test harder. They may breadcrumb. They may accuse you of being cold. They may suddenly show interest. That is not proof you're wrong. That is proof the old pattern is being challenged. When someone has benefited from a system, they don't like when the system changes. But if you hold your standard with calm dignity, something important happens. The avoidant is forced to face reality. Either they learn that connection requires consistency, or they leave because they were only comfortable with access without responsibility. And both outcomes, ladies and gentlemen, protect you. So, keynote 1 is the foundation. Ignoring you continues because it works and it costs nothing. The moment you change the cost, you change the pattern. And whether they rise or run, you stop paying the price with your self-respect. Ladies and gentlemen, the second keynote is the brutal truth that most people don't want to admit because it exposes how the pattern gets trained. If they ignore you and you chase, explain, or keep the door open, you are teaching them to ignore you more. Not with your words, but with your behavior. And behavior is the language the nervous system understands. Let's make this simple. In any relationship, whatever gets rewarded gets repeated. If someone does something and it brings them comfort, access, relief, or attention, the brain stores that as a successful strategy. For avoidance, ignoring you is often not a conscious "I want to hurt you" choice. It's an automatic regulation choice. I feel pressure, so I withdraw. The withdrawal calms them. That's the first reward. Now comes the second reward, and this is where your audience needs to really listen, because it's the part that feels like love but functions like training. When they withdraw and you chase, you remove the consequences of their withdrawal. You fill the silence with your effort. You carry the connection by yourself. You do emotional labor they refuse to do. You soothe them, reassure them, accommodate them, and basically say, even if you disappear, I will keep the bond alive. That becomes the second reward. Guaranteed access without consistent presence. So the avoidant learns, I can ignore and I still get you. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why the relationship becomes a loop. Because your chasing is not just you reaching for them. It's you stabilizing the relationship in the exact way that prevents them from developing stability. You become the bridge every time they step away. You become the regulator. You become the safety net. And the more you do that, the more the avoidance nervous system associates your presence with pressure and your absence with relief, because you keep increasing intensity when they're already overwhelmed, so their pattern becomes even more entrenched. They ignore, you chase. They feel pressure, they withdraw. You chase more. They feel more pressure. They withdraw more. And what started as I need space becomes I can vanish whenever I want, and the relationship will still be there. This keynote is not here to blame you. It's here to free you. Because if your behavior has been part of the training, your behavior can also be part of the correction. Now, let's talk about the 3 most common forms of chasing that accidentally reward ignoring, and I want your audience to see themselves in it so they stop doing it. The first is the double text spiral. You send one message, no reply. You send another, then another. Are you okay? Did I do something? Please just tell me. Each message is not only your anxiety speaking, it's also confirming to them, you can leave me in uncertainty and I will still pursue you. That lowers the cost of ignoring you. The second is the paragraph of explanation. You think, if I explain my feelings calmly, they'll understand. But avoidants often hear long emotional explanations as a demand. Even if you're gentle, their system hears pressure. So they withdraw more, and the more you explain, the more they feel justified leaving, because now they can label you as too emotional. Again, your explanation becomes their excuse, and their silence becomes their relief. The third is the open door forgiveness. They disappear, and when they return, you instantly reset. You act like nothing happened. You accept crumbs as a comeback. You give warmth and intimacy immediately because you're afraid they'll leave again. But what you teach them is, even if you ignore me, you can return without repair. That's the biggest reward of all. It turns the relationship into a revolving door. Ladies and gentlemen, this is why keeping the door open is not always love. Sometimes it's fear disguised as kindness. You're not keeping the door open because they deserve it. You're keeping it open because you're terrified of the finality of losing them. But every time you keep it open without standards, you teach them there is no price. Now here's the turning point of the keynote. The opposite of chasing is not cruelty. The opposite of chasing is self-respect. Self-respect says, I'm not going to beg for basic communication. Self-respect says, I'm not going to reward silence with more effort. Self-respect says, I'm not available for hot and cold. Self-respect says, if you want access to me, you show up consistently. And here's the part that creates real curiosity in the audience. What happens when you stop chasing? At first, the avoidant may test harder. They may breadcrumb. They may send a casual message to see if you'll melt. They may accuse you of changing. They may call you cold. Why? Because they were comfortable with the old rules. You changing the rules forces them to either rise or lose access. And that's the point, because if they are capable of growth, your boundary will not scare them off. It will clarify the structure and help them show up better. But if they were only benefiting from your open door, your boundary will feel like a threat. They will resist. They will fade. They will want the rewards back without the responsibility. So keynote 2 is the hard lesson that becomes your power. If they ignore you and you chase, you are training them to ignore you more. If you stop chasing and you hold your standard calmly, you change the cost. And once the cost changes, the pattern either changes or the person exits. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, you stop sacrificing your dignity just to keep someone near. Ladies and gentlemen, the third keynote is where your power becomes real, because it removes the myth that emotions are what change avoidant. Most people think the way to teach an avoidant a lesson is to get louder, to cry harder, to explain deeper, to show them the pain so clearly that they finally get it. But avoidant psychology doesn't change through emotional intensity. Avoidant psychology changes through structure. This is why keynote 3 is so important. The real power move is not anger, it's structure. You become calm and unavailable to disrespect. Now let's define what structure means, because people hear that word and think it means controlling the other person. It doesn't. Structure means you stop running your relationship on feelings and start running it on standards. It means you stop letting inconsistency be normal. It means you stop letting silence be a habit. It means you stop giving access when the basic requirements of respect are missing. Structure is not a punishment. It is a container. And without a container, an avoidant relationship becomes a leak. Your peace leaks. Your self-respect leaks. Your time leaks. Your attention leaks. You keep pouring yourself into someone who only drinks when they're thirsty and disappears when they're full. So what does it mean to be calm and unavailable to disrespect? It means you stop reacting from anxiety. You stop responding from the wound. You stop trying to win their attention. You stop making your love cheaper every time they pull away. You become steady, and steadiness is the one thing an avoidant can't manipulate easily, because steadiness doesn't chase, and it doesn't explode. This is where many people get it wrong. They think boundaries must be dramatic. They think consequences must be loud. They think to teach someone a price you have to punish. But punishment is still emotional engagement. Punishment still keeps you tied to them. Punishment still gives them a reason to blame you. Punishment often triggers avoidance because it feels like criticism, control, or rejection. So punishment doesn't teach, it escalates. Structure teaches quietly. Structure teaches through consistency. Structure says, if you disappear, I don't chase. If you return, you don't get instant intimacy. If you want closeness, you show up reliably. That is a system, and systems change behavior better than speeches. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the key shift in keynote 3 is this: you stop confusing love with access. Love can exist in your heart, but access is earned through behavior. You can care about someone, still not be available for how they treat you. That's what mature love looks like. It's not unconditional access. It's conditional closeness. because closeness without respect becomes self-abandonment. So let's talk about what being unavailable to disrespect looks like in practical terms. It means you don't keep texting when someone is ignoring you. It means you don't respond immediately to breadcrumbs that arrive after days of silence. It means you don't jump into deep emotional conversation the second they show up. It means you don't accept the reset button. It means you don't carry the relationship alone. It means you stop trying to convince someone that you deserve basic human decency. Now, this is where the audience feels resistance, because they fear if they stop chasing, the avoidant will leave forever. But listen carefully, if the only way someone stays in your life is by you chasing them, they are not staying. You are holding them. And what you're holding is not love. It's a pattern. Structure reveals the truth, and truth is always safer than uncertainty. Because once you become calm and unavailable to disrespect, two things happen. One, you protect your nervous system. Your anxiety decreases because you stop living in reaction. You stop living in their timing. You stop living in the space between their messages. Your life becomes yours again. Two, you change the avoidance experience of you. They no longer experience you as someone they can ignore and still access. They experience you as someone with boundaries, someone whose presence requires respect, and that changes the cost. Now, why does this matter for an avoidant specifically? Because avoidants often live in a world where they can manage closeness by withdrawing. If they feel pressure, they disappear. And many partners respond by chasing, which confirms the avoidant's sense of control. But when you become structured, the avoidant cannot regulate by disappearing anymore, because disappearing now produces loss of access. It produces distance plus consequence. And that is what forces growth. Here's the secret most people don't realize. Avoidants will often respect what you enforce more than what you beg for. Not because they are cruel, but because boundaries are clear and clarity feels safer than emotional turbulence. When you are calm and consistent, you are predictable. When you chase and collapse, the dynamic becomes intense. Avoidants run from intensity, but they can sometimes rise to clarity. So keynote 3 is teaching your audience to stop performing pain and start embodying standards. You don't need to be rude. You don't need to be cold. You don't need to play games. You simply become structured. You decide what you will and will not participate in. And here is the final truth of keynote 3. Structure is the price. Not your anger, not your tears, not your speeches. Your structure tells the avoidant, ignoring me doesn't get you closer to me. It gets you further from me. And when that becomes consistent, the avoidant has only two choices. They either learn to show up or they lose access. Either way, ladies and gentlemen, you stop paying the price with your dignity. Ladies and gentlemen, the fourth keynote is the first must-do step that actually changes the entire emotional economy of the relationship. Remove emotional access. And I want you to understand what that really means, because most people think removing access means blocking, ghosting, or becoming cruel. Removing emotional access means you stop giving someone the most valuable parts of you, your attention, your reassurance, your intimacy, your emotional labor, while they are actively disrespecting you through silence, inconsistency, and withdrawal. Because the truth is, many avoidants aren't ignoring you because they're strong. They're ignoring you because the relationship has been set up in a way where they can withdraw and still receive benefits. They can go silent and still have you available. They can disappear and still come back to warmth. They can deliver crumbs and still get a full meal. That is emotional access. And as long as that access remains free, the pattern remains profitable. So this keynote is about stopping the profit. Now, what is emotional access? Emotional access is not just replying to a message. Emotional access is your emotional availability. It's the way you pour yourself out. It's your instant responsiveness. It's your late-night support. It's your endless understanding. It's your willingness to comfort them, validate them, and soothe them even when they've created the very pain you're soothing. Emotional access is you staying psychologically open to someone who is behaving like the door is optional. And ladies and gentlemen, here is the uncomfortable truth. Many people give emotional access because they are afraid. Not afraid of the person, afraid of the silence. Afraid that if they don't respond quickly, the avoidant will leave, afraid that if they don't stay warm, the avoidant will punish them with distance. So they keep offering access as a way to keep connection alive. But what they don't realize is that they are feeding the very behavior they want to stop. If someone ignores you and you keep giving access, you are teaching them, ignoring me is safe. So removing emotional access is not a game. It's a boundary that tells reality. Inconsistency does not get closeness. Here's how it looks in real life. They ignore your message. Your nervous system wants to fire off a second text. Hey, your nervous system wants to explain. I didn't mean it like that. Your nervous system wants to fix the tension. Can we talk? That urge is not love. That urge is anxiety trying to regulate itself through contact. And the moment you follow the urge, you hand them access again. So step one of removing access is stopping the automatic chase. No double texts, no follow-up begging, no just checking in, no paragraph to earn. Basic communication, because every follow-up is a gift to the person who is withholding. And yes, it will feel uncomfortable, because you have trained your body to calm down by reaching. That's why this step feels like withdrawal. You're not only breaking a relationship pattern, you're breaking your own nervous system habit. Now, step 2 is removing access when they return. This is the part most people miss. They think emotional access is only given during silence, but emotional access is most dangerously given at the moment of return. The avoidant disappears, then comes back with a casual hey, and you flood them with warmth because you're relieved. You give them the full version of you immediately. You reward the return without requiring repair. That teaches them the cycle works. Ignore, return, reset. So removing access means you do not treat a return like a reunion. You treat it like a check-in. Warm but brief. No intimacy, no deep emotional availability, no long conversations unless they show seriousness and consistency. You are polite, but you don't reopen the door fully. And ladies and gentlemen, the reason this is so powerful is because it creates consequence without cruelty. The consequence is simply you don't get closeness when you act inconsistent. You don't get my emotional world when you disappear. You don't get the benefits of me while you disrespect me. Now, what happens inside the avoidant when you remove access? Their old strategy stops regulating them as efficiently. Before, they could ignore and still keep you emotionally attached. That gave them control. But now, silence doesn't produce your chase. Return doesn't produce instant intimacy. Their nervous system starts to feel the cost. They can no longer regulate by withdrawing without consequence. And that is the first time they have to face discomfort instead of escaping it. This is where people get scared. Because the avoidant may react. They may test you. They may breadcrumb harder. They may act offended. They may say, "You're being cold." They may try to pull you into an argument. But ladies and gentlemen, that reaction is not proof you're wrong. That reaction is proof that the old system is being challenged. Because when someone is used to free access, boundaries feel like rejection. But you are not rejecting them. You are rejecting the pattern. And the deepest part of this keynote is this. Removing emotional access is how you stop being an option. It's how you stop being a convenience. It's how you stop being the emotional home that someone visits only when they want comfort. It's the moment you become the kind of person who says, silently through behavior, "You don't get all of me while giving me half of you." This is the must-do step, because without it, every other message is just talk. With it, the relationship becomes structured by reality. And reality is the only teacher that avoidance truly respects. Ladies and gentlemen, the fifth keynote is the line in the sand that changes everything. Because once you remove emotional access, you must install a new rule. Without a clear rule, the avoidant will keep testing, and you will keep getting pulled back into the same cycle. That's why keynote 5 is this. Set one clean standard, no lecture, no emotional essay, no courtroom speech, one clear sentence that defines the conditions of access. Because boundaries are not arguments, boundaries are doors. Here is the standard again. And I want you to feel how calm and powerful it is. I'm not available for inconsistency. If we continue, I need respectful communication and consistency. That's it. Notice what it doesn't do. It doesn't attack. It doesn't label them as evil. It doesn't beg. It doesn't demand. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't plead for agreement. It simply states your availability. It's not about controlling them. It's about defining what you will participate in. Now, why does it have to be one clean sentence? Because avoidants shut down under emotional pressure. They interpret long paragraphs as demands. They hear intensity and feel trapped. So, if you try to teach them the price with a long lecture, you're giving them an exit ramp. You're giving them the ability to detach and say, "This is too much." You're handing them a justification. And even worse, you're doing emotional labor again, trying to make them understand what they are unwilling to face. A clean sentence does something different. It leaves no drama to react to. It leaves no debate to win. It leaves no emotional storm to blame. It places the focus where it belongs, on behavior and standards. Ladies and gentlemen, the biggest mistake people make is they use boundaries as a performance of pain. They set a boundary while still hoping it will convince the person to stay. They write it in a way that says, "Please choose me." But a real boundary isn't an attempt to be chosen. It's proof that you choose yourself. And that's why the standard must be calm. Calm means you're not begging. Calm means you're not trying to manage their reaction. Calm means you're not negotiating your dignity. Now let's talk about timing. You don't set this standard mid-panic. You don't set it while you're spiraling. You set it when you are grounded, because this standard is not a threat, it's a truth. It's you telling reality, "This is what I require." And if they're not capable of meeting it, you stop volunteering for emotional starvation. So what happens after you set the standard? Here's the part your audience needs to hear. You stop talking, because the power of a standard is not in the sentence. The power is in the follow-through. Most people set a boundary, then immediately chase to explain it. They send another paragraph. They defend it. They argue. They soften it. They apologize for it. They ask, "Do you understand?" They ask, "Are you mad?" And in doing that, they turn the boundary into a negotiation. They teach the avoidant, "If you resist, I will lower the standard." So the avoidant learns resistance works. The cycle stays alive. A standard only works when it's not up for debate. So you set it once. Then you let behavior speak. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the avoidant will respond in one of three ways, and each response is valuable. First response, they respect it. They might not love it, but they respect it. They step forward. They communicate more consistently. They ask what you need. They show willingness to repair. They keep showing up after the initial conversation. That is a good sign. Not a guarantee, but a sign. Second response. They argue it. They minimize. They say you're overreacting. They try to keep things vague. They want the benefits without the responsibility. This response reveals they are not ready for mature connection, and this is where your follow-through is everything. If you argue back, you re-enter the emotional loop. If you chase, you teach them that they can ignore your standard. But if you stay calm and consistent, you reveal the truth. They want access, not accountability. Third response, they disappear. This is painful, but it is also clarity. Because if a person disappears when you require respect, it means they were only comfortable when you were easy to neglect. They were only comfortable when your needs were flexible. They were only comfortable when you were available without standards. Their disappearance is the price you stop paying because you stop participating in a dynamic that harms you. Now here's the deeper psychology of why a standard shakes an avoidant. Avoidants often rely on ambiguity to keep control. Ambiguity means they can disappear and return without consequences. Ambiguity means they can define the relationship only when it benefits them. Ambiguity means you stay hoping, and hoping keeps you available. When you set a clean standard, you remove ambiguity. You remove the gray zone where they can take without giving. You remove the comfort of "I'll show up when I feel like it." And that can trigger them. They may try to turn your boundary into an emotional fight. They may accuse you of being cold. They may call it a game. But ladies and gentlemen, when someone benefits from your lack of boundaries, Your boundaries will feel like a threat, not because you are wrong, but because the old system is losing power. So, keynote 5 is simple. One clean standard, no lecture, no begging, and then silence. You let them reveal themselves through behavior. You stop trying to drag respect out of someone. You require it. Because teaching the avoidant the price of ignoring you is not done through speeches. It's done through structure. And the structure begins with one sentence that changes your entire identity. I'm not available for inconsistency. Ladies and gentlemen, the 6th keynote is the final test, the part that separates people who truly change their life from people who stay trapped in the same loop with a new promise every month. Because once you remove emotional access and set a clean standard, the avoidant will almost always try one more move, the breadcrumb, a casual reach out, a small message, a like, a miss you, something that looks innocent but carries one purpose, testing whether you'll reward minimal effort with full access. This is why keynote 6 is so powerful. Stop rewarding breadcrumbs, reply brief, then pause, and then you watch what they do next, because what they do next tells you everything. Now let's define a breadcrumb precisely. A breadcrumb is contact without commitment. It's a tiny signal with no responsibility attached. It keeps you emotionally engaged while they remain emotionally protected. It creates hope without offering stability. And hope is the most addictive drug in an avoidant dynamic. Hope keeps you waiting. Hope keeps you available. Hope keeps you soft enough to reopen the door without repair. So the avoidant sends the breadcrumb and your nervous system lights up. Relief floods your chest. Your mind races. They're back. They miss me. This worked. And that relief is dangerous, because relief feels like love when you've been starving. But relief is not love. Relief is your anxiety calming down because the uncertainty finally ended for a moment. And ladies and gentlemen, if you confuse relief with love, you will always reward breadcrumbs. This is why you must learn the new response pattern, warm but brief, then pause. Warm but brief means you don't punish them. You don't attack. You don't lecture. You don't pour your heart out. You don't reopen intimacy. You simply acknowledge politely without giving access. Something like, good to hear from you. Hope you're well. Then you stop. No questions. No emotional conversation. No late night deep talk. The pause is where your power lives, because the pause forces intention. The pause forces effort. The pause forces them to do something beyond comfort-seeking. If they truly want to reconnect, they will step forward, they will ask to talk, they will address the inconsistency, they will make plans, they will show consistent communication, they will bring something real. But if they only wanted to test access, the pause will expose it. They will fade, they will keep it vague, they will circle with more crumbs, they will pop in and out. They will avoid accountability, and if that happens, you must treat it as data, not destiny. Because breadcrumbs are not proof of change. Breadcrumbs are proof of craving. Craving for comfort, craving for familiarity, craving for reassurance, craving for control. Now, ladies and gentlemen, here is the most important psychological truth behind breadcrumbs. Avoidants often come back when they feel lonely or unsettled, not when they are ready to be consistent. Their withdrawal created emptiness, and they want to soothe that emptiness. But soothing emptiness is not the same as building a relationship. They are different goals. Comfort can be achieved in one message. Commitment requires behavior over time. So when you stop rewarding breadcrumbs, you're not being harsh, you're being accurate. You're saying, I will not confuse your momentary emotion with lasting change. This is where the price becomes real, because the price is not silence. The price is not blocking. The price is not revenge. The price is simply, you don't get my emotional world unless you show up consistently. That's the price, and it's fair, because your emotional world is valuable. It is not a free sample. Now, the avoidant may respond to this in predictable ways. Some will step up. They will realize you are not the same person who used to melt. They will feel the difference. They may feel uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort is where growth begins. They may start showing up with more consistency because they don't want to lose access again. That is the best case scenario. Others will react defensively. They might accuse you of playing games. They might say, why are you being like this? They might try to pull you into an argument. But understand what that is, a pressure tactic. It's them trying to get you to abandon your boundaries so they can regain comfort. If you argue, you re-enter the emotional loop. If you defend, you negotiate your standard. If you over-explain, you become the emotional laborer again. So what do? You stay calm, short and consistent. You repeat the standard with no extra emotion. I'm open to continuing if it's consistent. I'm not available for hot and cold. Then you stop again. That's it. You don't chase their agreement. You don't need them to understand. You need them to behave. Ladies and gentlemen, the reason this keynote changes lives is because it breaks the addiction to potential. People stay stuck with avoidance because they are addicted to the version of the avoidant that shows up for 2 days after a breakup. They are addicted to the hope that this time will be different. They keep reopening the door based on emotion, not evidence. And every time they do that, they teach the avoidant that the relationship can be restarted with minimal effort. Keynote 6 ends that forever, because the moment you stop rewarding breadcrumbs, you force one of two outcomes. Either they rise into maturity, or they reveal they were never coming back for you. They were coming back for comfort, and both outcomes protect your dignity. So the final test is simple. Don't melt at contact. Don't confuse relief with love. Respond warm and brief, then pause. Let their actions prove their intention, because in the end, ladies and gentlemen, the avoidant will only respect what you consistently enforce. And when you enforce your worth calmly, you teach them the real price of ignoring you. They lose access to someone they can't replace easily.